Yeah, there's an on-off button right up here.
Oh, okay. All right, good. That's good. I will. All right. So we're going to start. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today and for your flexibility with our meeting room. They're doing some construction right there in the foyer as you come in, and the reason they're doing that is to move Kathy Housekeeper, who's the receptionist for the agency, down there by the door where people actually come in. So she's not down there by the door that's locked. You have to have your badge to get in. They'll actually have her there where people can actually see where she is and check in with her, and she can help direct them to meeting rooms or call people that they're coming in to meet with. So this is not the ideal setup. We didn't have time to really come down this morning and trade out the tables or do any of that kind of stuff, but we really appreciate you being here. I'm Becky Donaldson. I'm the coordinator, and I'm changing the name of our team to the ESEA Programs and Related State Initiatives, because it really is a better description of what my team does. We're not just federal programs. And so we're making that change, and I've got permission from the assistant superintendent that's over our division to do that. I'd like to start out by doing introductions, and we'll start with the people that are joining us from our partner agencies. We have people here from school districts, charter schools. I think Karen Peterson from Governor Herbert's office is joining us online today. Becky Peters will keep track of who is participating online. So I'm going to start over here with Barbara Smith and have you introduce yourselves. And you can kind of pass this mic along so everyone can hear.
I'm Barbara Smith, and I'm the director of the Utah Family Partnership Network, and our emphasis is on parent engagement, especially in low-income schools.
I'm Nancy Kennedy. I just finished serving 4 years in leadership of the Utah State School Boards Association, and I'm a member of the Box Elder Board of Education.
I'm Nancy Ward, and I'm over federal programs in Jordan School District.
I'm Noelle Converse. I'm the Special Education Director in Granite School District.
Charlene Louie, the Director of Educational Equity in Granite School District.
I'm Erica Thomas. I'm a K-12 instructional coach in Provo City School District.
Leanne Wood. I'm the Utah PTA Education Commissioner, and I live up in Davis School District.
Deborah Swenson, and I'm the Lead Director, Superintendent of Hawthorne Academies in West and South Jordan.
Heidi Green, and I'm the principal of Meadowlark Elementary in Salt Lake City School District.
Murray Mazeras with the State Board, Title I, Part D, Neglect and Delinquent. That's not me, that's the program I work with.
No, you don't want to go?
I'm Cheryl Ellsworth. I work here at the State Board of Education, and I'm the Family and Community Engagement Specialist.
I'm Sandra Jolovich-Motes. They just call me JM, and I'm the Executive Director, Equity and Access, Ogden School District.
Camille Sheik, Utah State Board of Education. I oversee the 21st Century Grants.
Good morning. Chuck Foster, American Indian Education Specialist, Utah State Board of Education.
Deirdre Strait, SEC Chair at Highland High School and member of the Early College Subcommittee here at the state, and then also on some Salt Lake School District committees and subcommittees.
Christelle Estrada, Title III Federal Programs, and I work for the Children of Utah.
My name is Val Murdoch, and I work with Title I monitoring.
Hello, I'm Robert Palmer. I work in partnerships for student success and school improvement.
I'm Max Lang, and I work here in this office with state school turnaround and federal school improvement.
Sandra Grant, I work with everybody in Becky's group for fiscal compliance.
Thank you. Becky, is there anyone else joining online that, okay, Becky will be monitoring that. As you...
Kim Dorr sent a message saying she's stuck in traffic.
Oh, Kim Dorr will be here from Academica West, also representing charter schools, stuck in traffic. We have a rather full agenda, but there are a number of items we need to bring to this committee. As some of them are information items, some of them we may need you to, we may need to have somebody make a motion and actually kind of take a vote out as to whether, you feel like this should move forward or not. So I'm going to turn the time over right now to Dr. Estrada. She's going to talk to you a little bit about the changes under the Every Student Succeeds Act that impact accountability for English learners.
Okay, so if you take a look at your packet, and it looks like this. People who were at the ALS directors meeting, have already seen this, but I'm just going to go over it. Briefly. The other thing is, in the very beginning, Title III was approved in the first round in December, and then, because Title III accountability is now in Title I, there ended up being some issues in relationship to identifying a trajectory based on, because there's so many variables based on when students come in, their English proficiency, whether they're literate in their own language, if they have a refugee background, and so, interrupted formal education. So it's really challenging to look at a trajectory in relationship to our own data. So we actually did some generalizations based on the research. But then the feedback from Title I was, you have to actually use your own data and really be strategic in relationship to how the state agency is going to support every single school. Right? So that was the key, especially because we were doing other work in early college, and we saw these patterns of kids who were English learners and were reclassified as English proficient early on, like in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and then started taking advanced courses and AP courses and concurrent courses, and then earned biliteracy seals. So this was, this is what we want to encourage. So when we looked at it again with the accountability, the data people, the assessment people, and then some of the things that actually ended up happening in the legislative session, we actually changed the way we thought about this to increase the opportunity for looking at those transitions. When we ran the data, we saw that when English learners were in the 5th and 6th grade, all of a sudden, when they got into 7th grade and middle grade, the rates of reclassification plummeted. And so that transition from elementary to middle school was really challenging for kids. It's just challenging for most kids anyway, but if you're an English learner, it's even more. Then we also, a whole challenge in relationship to feeling self-confident and, and developing their sense of identity with their peers and all that. Then, based on the data, we saw another big gap between middle school and high school. And again, most of the data show that if you're not reclassified as English proficient, by the time you're in upper elementary, and I'll send out things so that you can see what the research says. It's not likely they're going to have very much success, not only in secondary, but generally in their life. So it's not really, if we don't figure out how we can structure something that's more effective in the transitions. So then what we did is we use that data to develop a trajectory and develop a baseline. And then if you look at the way it's organized in yellow, we did this K3 experience because oftentimes there's an issue around assessing kids early and then maybe not assessing them in their own language, which then is a problem because then people think that there are special needs, right? They're special needs students, you see, instead of, oh, well, developmentally they're working on developing English, right? It has nothing to do with disability. And then we did 4 to 7, which is, again, trying to bridge that gap, and 8 to 11. One of the reasons we organized the interim goals this way and the long-term goals was to really look at how you could braid resources with the K3 reading initiative. So see what we're trying to do? We're trying to connect all these disparate pots of money to think more strategically in how you move kids from one transition to another, especially when they're most vulnerable. We also, the grade 4 to 7 to support effective transitions from elementary to middle. I'll give you an example. At Granite Park Junior High in Granite School District, they have a demonstration site which is an AVID site, and when we visited them, we saw kids stand up from refugee backgrounds and all kinds of backgrounds in the AVID classroom, and they were doing Socratic seminars based on a point of confusion in other academically challenging classes, and they were leading it in groups. And we're going to spend time, that's why I have to run off. We're doing videotapes of promising practices because, you know, oftentimes people will come in, and this is wonderful because we have these resources from out of state. But then people say, well, you did that in Virginia, or you did that in Massachusetts, or you did that wherever. But here we have all these amazing things that are actually happening, you know, in our own schools, in our own classrooms. So we're highlighting those kinds of things and having an opening on the website to really called Utah's Promising Practices with exemplary examples so teachers can actually see, oh, so this teacher is working this way with this group of students who are level 1 and level 2 English learners. I've seen some of the best instruction with level 1 and level 2 English learners in Park City. The best high school classes in the content link class and in Hillcrest, where they do biology for everybody in team teaching. So all these examples are great examples, but oftentimes most people don't know about them. So what we're really trying to do is put the responsibility of technical assistance on the state agency to highlight what's really happening in schools that would make a difference for instruction. The rest of the page, that's the piece that's the most important. If you look at the second page, it just shows the trajectory in relationship to K3, 4, 7, 8, 11. It's not designed, you know, like the No Child Left Behind was, where it was, you know, I don't know, 100% of students by whatever that year was. No, it's actually based on our data. That's how we did the trajectory. The other thing that I think is important for you to know that's in the monitoring plan, and again, Granite did an exceptional job of using the assessment tool to develop evidence to show their practices, not just about compliance, but then you know, increasing improvement and using resources effectively. On page 3, you'll see the 5 ESSA indicators for reporting. Obviously, there's progress with annual interim goals. There's attainment, students who have achieved fluency in WIDA, reclassification who have achieved fluency because they've been enrolled successively in the last 2 years. On-time fluency, which is really challenging, but I want you to focus on the note where it says federal law instructs to measure the negative, which is the % of those not attaining fluency. But what we've designed is that USBE and all other indicators tend toward the positive, those attaining fluency. Therefore, this indicator measures the positive. That doesn't mean that we're not paying attention to those who haven't, right? But you see, we're framing it in relationship to if you have successes with which students and you're learning from that, that's how you evaluate and redesign your programs, right? Based on the student data in specific schools. That's really the point. And so it's our responsibility as a state agency to help schools build that capacity. And then, again, academic, reclassified English learners who are redesignated as fluent, and they meet their growth goal as defined in the accountability system. So that's the other issue. The other issue is because the Title III accountability is now in Title I, and it's also aligned to state accountability, that 9% of of each school's grade is going to be focused on whether English learners have actually made their annual growth goals. What was that percentage? 9%. And that'll be equated into the school's grade. Now, I've been working on this for about 2 years, and I've said this over and over again. And all of a sudden, people realize that this is, going to happen in September when the grades start coming out, and then you can challenge them. So any school that has at least 10 English learners, because that's the end size, will be held accountable for those students' annual growth. So I've had lots of calls, which is really wonderful. They call me, how can you help us? We're doing some of the most innovative professional learning with a whole group of charter schools. One is the Monticello Academy. We're doing an advanced ESL endorsement certification by the University of Utah. And then they have this wonderful team that they're working, and they're doing a competency-based portfolio that focuses on each student. And then with the Ascent Academies, there's a whole group of people that I met with. We have a team, and then we have an online series of courses, and they decide their sequence and how they're going to work in teams. So this is a really important leverage point, if you know what I mean. I mean, this is like a turning point with really great visionary educators who are willing to work really differently and not just say, well, we're going to do this ESL endorsement and it's going to take us 3 years from a university. It's not like that. It's what are we going to do immediately and what's most relevant for the English learners in our classroom. So y'all should be proud because it's really wonderful. Yes?
Once they're reclassified, are they still back to English?
Yes, for 4 years. And the reason, and I'll just tell you the reason for that. The reason, it used to be 2 years, and we weren't really clear about what that meant, but in the monitoring program it says specifically how you should do that. Because when students early on become designated as English proficient in English, doesn't necessarily mean that the instruction is so well scaffolded that they have access to more rigorous content, like, specific vocabulary in chemistry, specific vocabulary in biology, so you have to track the students so they don't regress because it ends up being more challenging because of academic language in the content areas. So it's 4 years. Other questions? This is a good thing. I mean, it's a major step. It is a major step. And in the interim Senate committee a couple of months ago, there were senators, when they looked at the gaps in the data with English learners, we have a whole group now who are wanting to, this is a big change, who want to work with us to make a significant difference in closing the gap with English learners and regular ed students. So again, we're at a really good strategic place. So I have to actually run to for an interview to videotape a superintendent because they're doing amazing things with refugees and other students. And then you'll have access to all of that, of how that superintendent allocated resources to make sure that things happened. Because we can keep saying things like, well, we don't have enough money. But really it's about how the funds are used in relationship to evaluating the effectiveness of programs based on what's happening with the children, right? I mean, that's really the point. So we're just really committed to helping people do that better and know how to do it. So any other questions before I would love to stay with you, but I have to run?
Just a clarification
Yeah.
for me, I'm sorry.
No.
So the senators, are these our state senators?
Yes.
that are getting on board?
Yeah. Oh, so the question was, when I mentioned about the senators, they're actually the state senators in the interim committee with the Senate Appropriations Committee when they were looking at some of the data that I presented earlier to the board, and they looked at the gaps, but they also saw some promising practices. And that's where they want to put the investment. If you have students, you know, an example, I went to a couple of, I was doing student focus groups because of the early college subcommittee that Deidre's on as well, and students are on that committee as well, and the things that they have to say about the way in which instruction is most effective and the ways in which it isn't. In one classroom, which is the most AP, it was an AP computer science class, the most diverse class I've ever seen in Utah. Lots of women, young women, really committed to science. We did interviews there. And one of the things that they said was this whole idea of, you know, she had to do fundraising because even the kids that were there, that most of them were on fee waivers, they couldn't afford the AP test. So those are the kinds of things that our state senators, they want to know what we really need from them in relationship to ensuring that those gaps are closed and that low-income students have access to early college courses. So, you know, we're, like I said, I think we're in a really good space.
Where would the innovative practices be published so the press would know to see that?
Well, I think I showed our group federal programs. It's called, it's not up yet, but when we launch, it'll be in September, and it's called Utah's Promising Practices, and it will be on the Utah Education Network. And then we'll have, you know, kind of a reception for people who were interviewed and some of the students there at the Eccles broadcast. So that'll be in September. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Christelle. I really appreciate Christella. When she said, I work for the children of Utah, that is absolutely true. She works tirelessly on behalf of children and youth in this state and adults. She's really awesome. Kim Dorr is here now, and so I want to introduce Kim. Kim is, I think you have a new title, Kim.
I have a title. I never had one before. Hi, I am the president of Academica West, and we serve charter schools here in Utah, so I'm the charter school representative.
Thank you. I'm going to turn some time over now to Dr. Max Lang. He's going to give you an update about what's happening in the world of school improvement.
Good morning. In your materials, there's a sheet front and back that's labeled Utah Systems of Support for School Improvement. What I'd like to do today is talk about briefly the two initiatives that are currently going on for school improvement in Utah. And then I'd like to spend some time talking about the elements of the strategic design that Utah Systems of Support is utilizing to move forward this work. So on the front page here, there are two initiatives that are currently going on. There's a state initiative, Senate Bill 234, School Turnaround and Leadership Development Act. The legislature allocated $7 million. These schools are the lowest performing 3% for 2 consecutive years. So that's any school in Utah. In the state accountability system, they fall in that lowest 3% percentage points for 2 consecutive years. Cohort 2, this past year, there were 5 schools identified. The funding under this particular bill is used for a number of pieces. These schools have to have conducted by a third-party partner a comprehensive needs assessment and a subsequent root cause analysis. And then the funding goes directly to those LEAs who will contract with a vetted list of USB approved turnaround expert agencies. Those agencies will work with those schools, partner with those schools to develop and implement a school turnaround plan. That's the state piece of it. Federal, under the ESSA Act, is Title I, Section 1003, school improvement. The way the funding comes off of that bill, well, you know what, let me start here. There are two identifications. There are two different identifications of schools under the ESSA Act for school improvement. The first one is called the Comprehensive Support and Improvement, otherwise known as CSI schools. These are the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools over the past 3 years average, and any high school in the state with a 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate at or below 67% for 2 consecutive years. The funding out of 1003 under Title I for CSI schools will only go to CSI schools, and this can be either by formula, it can be competitive, or a combination of both. I think what we're going to do moving forward will be a combination of both those things. A funding formula combined with a piece of competitive for that. Now, the uses of those funds, the statute says it can only be used to implement school plans for rigorous evidence-based strategies that are supported with strong, moderate, or promising evidence. So it has to be one of those things. So anything that comes back to us in the plan for CSI schools has to fit into that category. What's not listed in there and would be unacceptable use of funds would be things like purchasing items like computer hardware, software, excessive travel costs, sending large groups of staff out of state for conferences. The second identification for a school is targeted support and improvement. Otherwise, we call them TSI schools. This is any public school in which one or more student group is consistently underperforming. TSI schools at this point won't receive 1003 funds for school improvement. Rather, TSI schools develop improvement plans that are approved and monitored by the LEA. For Title I 1003 funds, the way that funding comes off the top is from our Title I allocation for the state, 7% comes off for school improvement. 95% of that 7% will be allocated out for CSI schools identified under there. In 2015, and the reason I bring all this up, the Utah legislature passed the first version of the state School Turnaround and Leadership Development Act. And they did that, and schools were identified and started implementing that process for school turnaround. The problem was some of those schools had already been identified for federal school improvement. So there created some conflict there. Moving forward, the state board and leadership here in this office, I think, made a wise decision in that, and you'll see that last statement there at the bottom. Schools moving forward will not be double identified. If a school is identified for state school turnaround, it will not be identified for Title I school improvement and vice versa. However, the process for both of these schools, and if you flip this over, whether a school is identified for state school turnaround or federal school improvement, they're going to participate in Utah's continuous school improvement cycle that is built around the 4 domains for rapid school improvement. And I'll just kind of walk through this. The 4 domains meaning every school is going to have a needs assessment and root cause analysis conducted. It will be based on these 4 domains. A plan will be developed and implemented also based in these 4 domains. The 4 domains are turnaround leadership, talent development, instructional transformation, and culture shift. Now, based on those 4 domains, schools will start to implement this continuous improvement cycle. And there are 6 steps of this, and I've listed them there. Set the direction, assess needs, create a plan, develop strategies, milestones, etc. Implement that plan, monitor the work, and adjust course. So you'll see there's a little thing there at the bottom, a little diagram that you can't read. Well, I'm going to turn some time over to Becky, who we're going to talk about the System of Support Handbook, which you'll see it's listed in here a whole bunch of times, and you can actually read that little diagram. So that is essentially the Utah Systems of Support for School Improvement, both state turnaround and federal improvement under Title I. Moving forward, it's going to be the same process for those schools.
What?
One more thing. If
Oh.
Becky tries to undersell how much work she put into this handbook, don't allow it.
Yeah, this handbook took over my life. I felt like I was writing another dissertation. I'm like, why am I doing this? So we have a final draft now. Title I director saw an earlier draft of this in March that was incomplete. But this fleshes out the 6 steps that are part of that circle that Max has on that handout that he made for you. We did not make copies for everyone. Becky Peters can certainly send copies out if that's something you want. I did send you an electronic copy. It needs to go through final editing, but we really wanted to have this committee have an opportunity to see it. And then what I'm planning to do sometime this summer is send out an invitation to, well, I'll send it out to those of you on this committee as well as our Title I directors and other people that will find out, other stakeholder groups, and have some opportunities for people to come in and spend a day or 4 hours or whatever we think it's going to take to really go through this and give us some more in-depth feedback before we operationalize this entire system. But we have worked on this really hard. We've, tried to gather input across this agency from child nutrition staff to, our data people, the content specialists in math and literacy and other areas. We brought in some charter school members of the agency from the state charter group. But we really are looking for really good feedback. And those of you here have such great experience and insights based on the roles that you have and the stewardships that you have in the roles that you fulfill. And those insights to us are critically important. So we want to have those opportunities for that meaningful feedback. But you can see what this handbook does is it goes through each one of those steps and includes information about what that step is really meant to be. So setting the direction, first of all, one of the first things that our team did here is that we developed a theory of action for school improvement. And trying to see where that is. So the first part is sort of the introduction there. Okay, it looks like, yeah, I don't have my glasses with me up here. Debbie's saying page 23.
It says theory of action for change.
Yeah, so the theory of action for change. This is our theory of action. So it's if we here at the Utah State Board of Education can do these things and reach out and work collaboratively across the state with all stakeholders, including parents, teachers, administrators, community members, external partners, other agencies, then we hope that we can really help achieve the imperatives of the State Board Strategic Plan, which is to ensure that it's excellence for each student, and they were very deliberate in using the word each and not every, but is to make sure that every student has equitable access to the things that they need to be successful, that each student has access to high quality instruction. And then the third imperative is systems values, which is working with groups like this that have stakeholders from a variety of roles coming together and providing input and feedback as we go through the process. And we really want to get feedback from my wonderful colleague Heidi Green and her peers across the state that are principals that over the years have engaged in this very hard, challenging work. JM is another one who's now at the district level, but JM has been very deeply involved in this work for a number of years in Ogden. I look to people like JM and I look to people like Heidi because they are the ones that have actually been the boots on the ground doing this work. So we want to make sure their voices are represented and heard because they will say, no, that's not going to work. You really haven't considered this, or you need to add this, or what about this? And so we want to make sure their voices are heard, that parents' voices are heard. So we just wanted to present that to you as an information item. I appreciate Max's work on this, and as he said, when turnaround first started in the state, we had schools already identified under Title I. Well, then those same schools were double identified under turnaround. So going forward, and it's in our proposed ESSA plan, which is not yet approved by the Department of Education. We're hoping that we can get that approved soon. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the meeting. Is that the state level funding will support schools identified that are in that lowest performing 3% of schools statewide. And there are certain conditions in that legislation and in the board rule around that legislation that we will be working with that set of schools. For the schools, Title I says identify the lowest 5% of Title I schools in the state. So when our data and statistics people run all of those data analyses, we will see, okay, which schools are in the bottom 5% that are Title I schools, and if they're not in turnaround, then we can leverage our federal funding to help support those schools, because we really don't have enough funding to provide both kinds of funding for schools that, and we don't want them to be in two systems, being, you know, I'm Title I, but now I'm turnaround, and that was really challenging for schools. So that's our proposal moving forward. What I would like this committee to do, and I'd like somebody to think this through and maybe make a motion, and we'll think it through and take a vote, is when I met with our, we had an ESSA School and District Improvement Work Group early on in the development of the state's ESSA plan. So we had people like Nancy that were on that committee, I think Heidi, there were representatives from various entities across the state that came together numerous times and helped us kind of flesh out what we, you know, some ideas about what should go in that section of the ESSA plan. What we proposed at that time, and that group discussed this quite a bit, we have the option from the Department of Education, as Max said, we can either use that funding strictly on a formula basis. And if we did that, we'd have to have a formula somewhat similar to Title I, which means some schools might get a lot of money, some might get hardly anything. So that doesn't seem exactly right. We can do it strictly on a competitive basis, where we send out applications and say, we have this amount of money, and then we know there would be schools that wouldn't be served if we do it strictly competitively, right? We'd have to rate all of those, and there would be schools that would apply that wouldn't be getting funded. The other option the earlier committee, the ESSA work group committee, liked better was having some sort of a small formula amount to give schools a base, and we would make that kind of an equal base, but then also based on what is the size of the school. We're talking about a comprehensive high school. That's very different than a very small rural, elementary school that serves maybe 100 students. Or if we're talking about a large elementary school in some of our larger districts, some of those schools are quite large. They're almost as large as some junior high schools are. So we have to consider that. You know, how many students are going to be served? How many faculty members are there? And then, so they would receive a base. All of these schools will go through the needs assessment process and root cause analysis, which is step 2 in our system of support. Then, based on the results of that needs assessment and root cause analysis, They would develop a plan, and as Max said, under ESSA, any Title I 1003A school improvement funds that are issued must be used to implement strategies, practices, interventions, things that meet the top 3 levels of evidence. And I should have printed this. We'll send this out to you after the meeting. But there is guidance that indicates what those 4 levels of evidence are. Like level 1 is basically experimental design, where you have a control group. Level 2 is quasi-experimental, where you have comparison groups that have been controlled, trying to control for bias and participation, that kind of thing. The 3rd level is more like correlational research. This looks like there's a correlation between schools that implemented this practice and what happened with student achievement. And then the 4th level, which cannot be used with 1003A funds, is like developing. So LEAs may be implementing specific strategies across their LEA that they're gathering data on to try to show that maybe eventually that LEA would have enough evidence to show that, well, you know, this really does work. We've studied it, we've implemented in these schools with this group of students. So that's kind of what we're looking at. So what I'd like this group then to consider is, based on the recommendation from that ESSA work group, what are your thoughts about us using the funding in a kind of combination of a formula to give every school a base amount? And I said we would adjust that based on school size and other factors. And then in addition, some competitive pieces of that. So those LEAs and schools that really look deeply at what their root causes are and try to find evidence-based practices and things that they can implement in those top 3 levels, that then we do some priority competitive funding. So every school would get a base amount, but there may be some schools in LA that say, you know what, we're really going to take this on. And we've really looked carefully, and we've looked at research, we've looked at Dr. John Hattie's work with the effect size indicators on, you know, what really impacts student learning, and we're really going to work on this. Yes, Cheryl. Yes. Yeah, the people online, we need to make sure we repeat questions.
Right, exactly.
Thank
So
you.
I just had 2 clarifying questions before I was to like ever vote or anything like that. So the first thing that I was thinking of, as we think of our school system and the way that we're setting this up for school improvement, some of the things that I've experienced in working with a lot of schools that have been identified as school turnaround, they obviously want to improve and they want to do better, but once they improve and do better, they lose funding. And so they're in this really weird place that, like, it's almost like penalizing them for improving. So I wanted you to speak a little bit to that, because I'm not sure where those schools are in this situation. And oh man, I lost my second thought. What was the very last thing you? Oh yes. Okay. So there are some principals I've also met and some staff that are a little bit more savvy, and they have a better understanding of research and best current practices. How do we support those that want to dive deeper but don't really know how to express it in their competitive grants or application, but they want it, but they may not have the resources or knowledge of what are best practices they should be looking for?
Thank you, Cheryl. I think you bring up some really important points. So to your first question about what happens to schools that have worked really hard, they improve, and then they come out of one of those identifications, and then they're kind of face a funding cliff. One of the things we're going to be looking for with these plans is that what is the LEA and the school's plan for sustainability? Our funds are limited, but schools that are Title I are also getting allocations of Title I funds from their LEAs. So it's how are they going to leverage their regular Title I dollars, going back to this practice of, if we're really about continuous improvement and doing what's best for the students in our school, we're going to stop spending Title I dollars on things that are not going to make a difference. We have a lot of schools that spend a lot of money on, I don't know how to say it, but just like fluffy stuff that isn't really going to impact student learning. It might be an allowable cost under the Title I law. It's not going to make a difference. I see the same thing at the district level as we review people's budgets. People budgeting, tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars to fly an entire school faculty, to Anaheim, California to go to a PLC conference. If they're going to spend that kind of money, they can bring presenters in to the LEA and to the school to do that professional development, make it more meaningful, and then set standards for accountability for people to implement that. But if I just fly off somewhere to a meeting and I'm running around to, an hour sessions here and an hour session there, I might get some good ideas, but then when I come back, what do I do with that information? And how would that impact my entire school? It may impact my classroom, but it's not going to impact the overall achievement of what's happening in that school. So it's going to be about leveraging funding across, having people look at all the funding coming into the school. There's trust lands funding, there's SPED funding, there's regular state and local funding. Looking at those funding streams, how are you setting goals and then leveraging those funding streams to support that goal? So there's not a Title I plan, and then a school improvement plan, and then a trust lands plan, and then a special ed plan, and then a digital teaching and learning plan, and that's what we see. We have plans stacked to here, and then they live on a shelf, and they're never operationalized. So that's kind of where I'm going with that one, Cheryl. And your second point was, now I've forgotten. Oh, the evidence base. Okay. Yeah, something that we're going to that we're charged with in ESSA is putting together resources, websites, vetted resources, places where district and school personnel can go to look at some of those things. And there are some national websites that exist. And some of those national websites look at published programs that are more like, okay, here's this math intervention program, and it's level 2 evidence, and then it will tell you the population of students that evidence was based on. And maybe it's 10th grade struggling students in math in an urban high school and again, so then you have to look at that and say, okay, if that applies to that group of students, that's where that research focused. And I'm a junior high or a middle school in a very rural, remote location with a very different population, the population that was studied. Is that going to be the right fit? Everything's very context specific. So something that I may have done in my classroom that worked well for me may not have worked well for JM in her classroom or in your classroom. So that's something that we have a big lift on that, and it's something that's on our radar, and meeting with colleagues from other states. Some states are putting together things that we're trying to learn from our peers in other states. And again, we'll have to bring people in to help us with that and bring our content specialists to the table as well. Yes, Kim?
First, I'd like to say I was around when Turnaround and Title I weren't talking together, so I very much appreciate that collaboration. Having said that, when you talk about all these different plans, if I had a wish for the future, it would be that the people that give the requirements for the literacy plan and the digital learning plan and the Title I plan actually then would collaborate and say, let's have the same components. I know everybody's trying to do best practices, but the requirements of each of those plans require the LEA to write them very differently.
Thank you, Kim. And yeah, that is something that we're trying to address here. But yeah, you bring up, it's a very valid point. Yes. Murray?
I have 4 thoughts. Number one, Title I Part D has 2 mechanisms dealing with finances. One, you identify your population, and then you target inside of that population who's going to receive services. There's no obligation to send money to everybody. Okay, so there's a different schema there. Number 2, I applaud the concept of systemic improvement and holistic systemic improvement. This ivory towers and these silos, it's got to go. It's got to change. With the Title I Part D funds, there's a national organization, and it's called the NDTAC, Neglected and Delinquent Technical Assistance Center, which is a subunit of the American Institutes for Research. Is there a similar thing for this area that we're talking about? Besides us creating our own domain of best practices, is there a national database or something we can draw from?
There are several national.
And I have a couple more behind that.
Yeah, there are several national things. There's the What Works Clearinghouse. There's the Evidence for ESSA, which is Johns Hopkins University developed. But most of those websites don't look at practices and strategies. They look at programs. So it's like, I'm going to purchase a literacy intervention. I'm going to purchase a math intervention. Dr. John Hattie's work looks at effect sizes of specific practices and strategies. So that's a good source, and we'll be looking into that. So there are national things, but it's just putting all that together in a one-stop shop.
Right.
And then providing some professional learning around that, and how do we identify whether this might be appropriate for our population or not. So that's something we've got to develop, Murray. It's not ready to go right now.
Okay, the other 2 points I was going to make is that if it's not required to have funding at every site, and I'm not sure what it takes to have effective programming coming out of X number of dollars, has there been a thought given to stratifying how the funds are going to be used? So, for example, larger sites will get X dollars as a baseline, plus they will, based on their application, they will receive X plus.
That's exactly what I said.
Okay,
was
then
that
for the mid-sized schools, it's X minus 50%.
Yes.
Is it that?
That's the plan that this group is going to take action on in a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Debbie.
Just one thought comes to mind. A number of years ago, when Land Trust was starting to roll out to the charter schools, the conversation was doing a based on numbers. And the smaller charter schools said that, the amount of money they were getting for the amount of work that was then required really makes an impact, because some of them are small. So I was just wondering how that will be taken into account on the base, because that it was a concern expressed then and it hasn't gone away.
Okay, thank you. That's really good. I think, Barbara, you had a comment?
Yeah, my question was, thank you. My question was, it sounds like the information they're needing to give to you on the competitive portion comes from the results of doing a needs assessment.
Yes,
so they're having to do a needs assessment before they get funding?
Yes.
Okay, just want to clarify that.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, that's a great clarification. Yeah, the funding would not be allocated out at all until, the base, maybe the small base for them to kind of get started, but the rest of the money would not be made available until we have the plan, and the plans have been reviewed and approved, and we may send them back and, ask for additional work or that kind of thing. And we'll certainly be providing a lot of technical assistance throughout that process. Yes, Jan.
I just have 2 comments. One, to build off of what Kim said. Yes, it would be nice to have everyone align the plans. However, that doesn't have to be a barrier, because say, for example, when district leadership has the digital learning plan, what the key role for the district's responsibility is to create a school improvement plan or school plan template that braids all of that together.
Yes.
Because the key is you have general goals, literacy, graduation, ELL focus, etc. But the key is your action steps. That's where you braid all of the different requirements from the different areas in, and that's what we've done, and you braid your resources.
Yes.
And then the second comment is I support going towards a small base in which then the plan is then they get additional funding, because sometimes when you get that award of that money, it distracts them, and they get sidetracked with the money, and then now what do I gonna do? And then everybody wants to spend it in different ways. It's better to truly look at your data. Where do we want to go? And then, because necessarily they first have to look at all their braiding. What is the basic money that I can use? At the state money, then I can look at my land trust and different things. Then what do I truly need additionally to do this?
I did not pay JM, but I should have. That was right, spot on. Because what we've been trying to talk to the Title I directors about at our meetings is you need to fund your plan. You don't plan for funds. Okay, it's the reverse. You fund your plan. So exactly what JM says, you have that plan. And then you look at all of your funding streams that you can leverage toward those overall goals, improving literacy, math, attendance, graduation, whatever it is that is the needs in that particular school. Then you look at that school improvement money as, okay, we've got these goals in mind. Then you look at funding that plan, not, ooh, we're going to get this $200,000. And then you start, like she said, you get people thinking, oh, we really need 100 more computers. No. Was that your root cause? Probably not. And we just had that happen in the last week. So that's kind of where we're going. So I need someone to maybe think through and make a motion that we can then take some sort of action so that going forward we know that we have the support of this committee in doing the base. We'll figure out how that's going to work, and then some competitive parts to it based on the quality of the plan and how well they plan to implement, and using implementation science to ensure a lot of things fall apart in implementation. Jane?
One issue before we get to that is when you figure out the base, the one thing that we have to address and account for is you have larger size schools and smaller size schools. And when I do the allocations for title, secondary schools automatically get a bigger chunk. So we need to go back, because you could have a small elementary school, but the number of the free and reduced kids or the targeted kids, that generate the funding is such a percentage of their school. We have to make sure that still gets weighted appropriately, because just a secondary school with not as great a percentage, just by sheer numbers, gets such the lion's share. So if we could figure out a way to account for that, that would be really very nice. I know the elementary schools out there would really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because they may be smaller, but it's still a significant impact.
And that's why
they just like, well, I don't walk away with as much money as a base.
Exactly. We'll bring people together again to help us. This committee, and we'll talk about it more in depth.
That'll be a little tricky.
Yes, it's not going to be easy.
Just a question on the timing, because I do have some concerns, like Cheryl was saying, with the competitive model in the rural districts. Do they have the access to the grant writers? We talk about this a lot. Will those resources be available to them when the funding is available to them? Like, is what comes first, the cart or the horse? But those need to be available.
Well, the way this works is there will be, schools have to set up a team that includes school people, parents, other people, some LEA representatives. They will work with the individuals that come in and conduct that needs assessment and root cause, and they will, work together to develop the plan. It's not something that I think people are going to send off to a grant writer somewhere to just put a lot of great sounding stuff on paper. The plan has to be owned by the school. Can't be written by a person at the district office or an external grant writer. It's got to be a living, organic plan that develops at the site. Kim?
I appreciate the work that you've done on this, Rebecca, and I'm very supportive of part of it being competitive. Having read many of those competitive grants, I don't think it has to be that complicated.
No,
but I do think the competition part shows the staff, the commitment that the school is willing to do, and the effort that they put into it. So I'm very supportive of the combination.
Thank you. Nancy?
Just one other plug when you start talking about bringing parent groups and getting things together. Every school in the state of Utah is supposed to have a school community council. Yes. And if there's a way that we can dovetail this into it, coming from a more rural area, people think there's this great, people desire and want to be on the school community councils. No. Most of our principals are begging. Yes. So I think as we talk about putting this committee together, that we talk about using resources that are already established and do the braiding thing in so many levels rather than implement a whole nother level.
Yes. Thank you, Nancy. Marie, one last comment.
Yeah,
we need to
super
go
short.
on.
Having been the chair of a community council for 2 years in a row, I absolutely applaud what she just said.
Thank you. So do I have anyone that's not a USBE internal staff member that is willing to propose a motion? All right, Barbara, she's great at this.
Okay. So I'd like to move that we create a, I don't know what you want to call it, a template that includes a base amount that goes to each school, but there also is a competitive element based on a needs assessment and quality plans. Okay. Is that everything you need?
All right, so we have Barbara made the motion, Barbara Smith, and JM has seconded that. Any discussion before we take a vote? Barbara, would you repeat that one more time?
Yes, I know. That we create a template. We create a template for these funds that, excuse me, has an element of base funding for every school, and then a competitive element based on their needs assessment and the quality of their plan.
All in favor? Oh, Leanne? Oh, the 1003A fund, yeah. You add that, Barbara.
This template will be applied to the 1003A funds. Yes.
So good. All right, JM seconds again. Okay, we ready to vote now? All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. And just one other clarifying thing. Max mentioned that the targeted support and intervention, those schools are going to be identified looking at the student populations within the school. And our data and statistics staff have run some preliminary data based on, our past data. And the two groups of students that are going to most likely put schools into that identification are students with disabilities and English learners. So just to be aware, and that applies to any public school, not just schools receiving Title I money, any public school. We don't have enough resources to spread that thin, and those plans will be developed under the direction of the LEAs, not under the direction of the Utah State Board of Education. We'll certainly try to put together technical support. Christelle is just incredible, and I know that she'll put things and supports together for those schools that have English learners as their identified group. Yes, Barbara?
Well, so if one of the identified groups is students with disabilities, often those programs are coordinated on the district level to make sure that the funds, so if these plans are coming from individual schools, I'm just trying to ask how that's going to be coordinated, because often a school is given a program with children with disabilities, and so that's an issue for them.
Yeah, those are under the direction of the LEA, and so really the onus is on the LEA to say, okay, we have within our district these three schools that their students with disabilities are really not performing well. There are enormous achievement gaps. So then it's up to the district to determine what supports they're going to provide to those schools. Okay, that accountability really rests at the LEA level. We know for some charter schools that are single schools that really don't have a lot of infrastructure, that'll be a little more challenging. So, we'll have to provide some support there.
One other comment is I would also encourage districts to think holistically, because there's now a requirement for literacy goals for younger grades. And we met as a district team, and we had added additional goals to the 3 required to include an ELL subgroup goal and a students with disability goal, because those are our targeted population. So it's important with all the requirements that are coming about that we integrate and braid them.
Exactly.
And make it easier for our schools. So if we keep that in our mindset, it'll be easier for all of our schools when this comes around.
Yes, thank you so much, JM. Yes, Nancy?
One other, in an ideal world, every school in our state will at some point be the lowest school and work their way back up. So we can't just isolate it and say this is just for specific groups, because as these lower ones improve, then a new group comes in. And like I said, it's an odd idea, but ideally every school should be on this improvement plan.
Yes, and every school in Utah is required to have an improvement plan. And so it's just, as James is saying, as you look at those plans and look at leveraging your funding and really look at your student groups within the school and really look to see if there are groups of students that need additional support, that we're providing those. Okay, I want to thank you for your attention to that and your time, and that was really helpful to us. I'm going to turn the time over now to Sandra Grant. She's our fiscal specialist in our team, and she's going to talk to you about a very little short policy we want to implement with carryover funds, and she'll explain that a little more.
Good morning. You probably all talked to me at one time or another. One of the things that is happening on a regular basis is that schools are not requesting their money, or their BAs are not requesting their money until the end of the year, the end of the time period, all of that kind of stuff. And it's becoming a real problem, especially when we get letters from the federal government that says, you have not drawn down this money, and that puts us in a bad light. So beginning on the 1st of July, and I think you guys all have this little memo in your packet, we would like to start monitoring carryover with more intensity. And what we're going to look at are those LEAs who have not requested any money by June 1st. Now, I think all of you are aware that the finance department here is now trying to do a year end on July 1 so that they can do all of their state identification, all their state reports, all of that kind of stuff, and that they're not going to do reimbursements probably in July and possibly even August. So the next reimbursement would not be till September, which would be the last day for your federal funds. So there's some things happening here, and we want to start looking at those things a little more closely, especially after the first year. So by law, Title I says you can't carry over more than 15% after the first year. So if you're getting less than, I think the amount is $50,000, it doesn't matter. You don't have to do a waiver. You don't have to do any of that stuff. But what we want to look at is if you're not spending your money and you're not requesting the money, then obviously you don't need the money. And we're going to look at possibly recalling that money and reallocating that to LEAs that are spending their money on a regular basis. So that's what this is. That's what we're talking about. And the other part of this is that we are no longer going to be able to let you spend part of your 18 money before you've spent all of your 17 money. So the rules going forward would be if you have prior year money, that has to be spent first. It doesn't matter. It has to be spent first. And in the new grants management system, when that comes online in July, it's going to be absolutely mandatory. You cannot do a request for new money if you have not spent old money. So that's another thing that's going to be coming up. So I just need your approval to put this into our financial book. So anybody willing?
Well, I just have a couple questions.
Okay.
We still have 18 months, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the law still allows for 18 months.
Yes.
So this proposal is not required by law.
No.
Okay, so I would go on the record as saying that it's not my favorite proposal. I think this is convenience for the state office, and I support that because you have a hard job. But I just want to be clear, this is not required by law.
No, it is not required by law. But the other thing that you have to realize is that we are now going with this new system and everything going to a risk management kind of thing. And so we're going to be looking at, number one, are things turned in on time? Are you requesting your money on a regular basis? Do you have any problems with your audit reports? Those kinds of things. And so not requesting your money puts you then in part of that risk management area where you then become, your school or your LEA is then identified as a higher risk. So that may involve more auditing. It may involve more monitoring, all of those kinds of things. I'm not saying that you have to do it quarterly, which we would love, but, you know, just so that you are requesting your money.
I totally support you, Sandy, and I would not want your job. So I totally support you and what you're doing. I just think it's a very much a change of philosophy that was made without input, and we're moving forward with it. And so I
Well, that's why we're asking for input.
Well, I think it's a little late for that. The grants management system has already been adopted. I don't think that if a school decides to not ask for their money quarterly, I don't know that that necessarily puts them at risk. They still could be doing a great job of monitoring their money. Having said all that, I will support it, but I think that the grants management system and all that stuff was done, and we're moving forward.
It wasn't our plan either. Yes.
As a principal who's been through SIG, and now I'm working through the SIG addendum, when I created a plan with our Title I director, we have a partnership with UEPC at the U, and they don't bill until later on in the fall, somewhere end of September. Even one of mine from the SIG grant hit later, and I had to go into my business administrator and the accounting department and almost fight for my money, because sometimes there are people in the downstairs area where there isn't as much communication with upstairs that collect on things that get nervous to lose the money. And even though they know it will be it's coming, but I keep having to talk to the U about, we've got to have you guys bill us earlier because our year end is June 30th and you guys aren't billing until September. And so there are issues with people collecting for us that may not be that bill and then trying to get the money to pay that out of the out of the current year fund. So when I went to make sure everything was done, I was told you have no money for 2 years of your SIG addendum. And that gave me a lot of heartburn in September. And I had to do a lot of watching where everything went, which is hard when you're in the middle of turnaround. But I would worry that that would have some accountants or people that collect for it in districts to get even quicker at collecting money instead of waiting for what is truly in the grant to be taken care of.
Well, and I understand that because we have a contract with them also and have the same problem. But on the other hand, though, you still have other expenses that can be requested. You've got salaries, you've got benefits, you've got supplies and materials. So it doesn't mean that you have to do a huge reimbursement request. You just have to do them more often, is all we're asking.
So that is something talk to our district about.
Part of the
More
problem and part of the thing that we're seeing is it's not the program. The program have submitted their budgets, they've submitted their receipts, they've given the information to the BA, and the BA hasn't done it. He hasn't sent in the request. And that's the problem.
So it may not be our district. It may be with other districts.
Yeah, and it could be, there are a ton of districts that do their things, even if they only do it twice in the 2-year period. I'm happy with that. It's when they don't do it at all that bothers me.
So my situation is a little different, and I think my September stuff is done.
Let me just clarify. I think this maybe you're thinking it's more ominous than it really is. One of the issues that we have is, as Sandy said, Title I funding is available for a 27-month period. So funds that are allocated, so say funds that were allocated to districts last year to fund this current school year that just ended, that was state fiscal year 18 money. We're coming now into fiscal year 19. So what Sandy is saying is that money that was allocated there, you have an original 12 months to spend it, and then you have an additional 15 months of carryover under the tidings amendment. What is happening though is we have issues where some systems are letting all that money sit in there, and if that money is not expended when that money, so the funding, so there's a difference between federal fiscal years and state fiscal years. Right now we are in federal fiscal year 18, and we don't have our federal funding for federal fiscal year 18. We won't see that, an award letter from the Department of Education until July. Maybe, and that's if our ESSA plan is approved. So we're in federal fiscal year 18, and so the money that we got last year from the federal government was federal fiscal year 17. Okay, that money then was allocated in state fiscal year 18. It's always different. And that money that was given to LEAs last year that they've been using throughout this last school year expires on September 30th of 2019. That's the end of that 27 months. What happens in some places is we don't get reimbursement requests for that funding. And if it's not drawn down by the deadline, that money goes back to the United States Treasury. Then we have the Department of Education calling and yelling at us and saying, you're not drawing down your money. That money is not in Utah. That money is in Washington, D.C. in the Treasury.
We're on a reimbursement request too.
So the only way we can draw the funds down awarded to the state are if the LEAs draw their funds down. So it puts us in a bind, and there are occasions when money goes back to the federal government, and then the Department of Ed said, look, we have every state in the nation saying that funding is not enough. It's not enough funding from the federal government. It's not enough funding from their state governments. And yet we have money being returned. That's the situation we're in. So what's that? This is not just going to automatically happen. We're going to send letters out to superintendents, charter leaders, business administrators, and program people, which are people like JM and Nancy and Charlene and Noelle and Deborah, and Kim, and say, you have a lot of money that's sitting there. Are you expending this money? Because if no reimbursement claims are coming in, we don't know if they're using that money, if that money is sitting there. We need an assurance that indeed this money will be claimed before that deadline. You see the position it puts us in as an agency here? That's what we're talking about. It puts all of us at risk with all of our federal funding when people do not draw that money down. Kim.
Again, I'm happy to support it. I think that Sandy is very user-friendly. I think if somebody gets her position, if she would ever leave and is not user-friendly, that would be where my concern would be.
Well,
Sandy is very user-friendly. The other comment I'd like to make, and I'm happy to support it, propose it, is for charter schools, we're talking about very little money. I do understand for districts talking about millions of dollars. So that's, I get why you're doing it. So I'm just, Sandy's very user-friendly, and she reminds you and says, are you going to pull this money down, and what are you?
Exactly, and that's all we're trying to do is operationalize something in writing so that people are aware. You know, we're not going to be punitive, and Sandy doesn't have the authority as a specialist to implement rules and things on her own anyway. So, yes, yes.
So I'm happy to make a proposal. Okay.
It is ironic that I'm going to be asking questions, and that's a private joke with Sandy. But the only question I want to clarify on this, because I totally support this, because I understand that how you just explained it is that it's a necessary paradigm shift for business administrators, because they think my deadline is the 27 months. And it does get complicated, especially when you have changeover in staff and all that. It's just simpler and cleaner to do that. But the question that I have is when we're changing a process and a paradigm, and I've lived that for a year and how difficult it is to get that to happen, my clarification is with this, does that mean that beginning July 1, we're going to be looking at the fiscal money for 19? Because I'm thinking if it's last year's money, June 1st is already
with
left.
the new money.
The new money for fiscal year 19. Right. Okay, because then we get time to do it. Because I'm going, I'm not going to make that, and I don't want my money going back because it's already been spent. I don't have it to give back.
The other thing is,
it just hasn't been requested.
The chances of it actually going back are going to be slim, because I don't want to call it back. I don't want to go in and have to do budget changes and all of that kind of stuff. I don't want to do that. That's too much.
And especially because the money has been spent. It just hasn't been requested.
Right.
So as long as it's for the new money, I think that's more than enough time to work with our BAs, because we've already laid the foundation. And I'll be honest, the risk management was a sense of urgency for some BAs. For mine personally, like, well, I don't want to get a mark. So I can start doing that. And then knowing that the possibility of losing it, that just adds it up again. Because it's just cleaner for everyone if it's requested in that year. Just cleaner.
Yeah. That's kind of what we're looking at.
Yeah,
you know,
lots of it actually happening, or probably
especially with me.
It's just a communication that
it could.
Please do this. Please help us to reduce risk. It's a control mechanism for reducing risk.
And we just had a state audit, so we may be making some other changes too. So who knows?
So
yes.
Just one more clarification then. So do the BAs understand this? They've been trained with this?
We will make sure that they all know it.
So go to their summer meetings are coming up, I think, in the next couple weeks.
Right.
So if we pass this now, then you can take that to them and get this started.
We hope.
So, okay.
If they'll let us go. Sometimes they don't.
Let's make the proposal. Yeah, I'll make it. Although I really wanted Rebecca to say, help us, help you, help me. I propose that we adopt the presentation on fiscal policy for expiring ESSA funds.
And I second it, so it's on the record, so they don't know that.
Kim, could you add in there that wouldn't start
Until-
wouldn't be effective until fiscal year 19. That'll just make it
Effective fiscal year 19. I believe Ogden might have some money.
We've honestly spent it. I tell them all the time, we have spent it.
Charlene?
So this discussion, the only thing, if you're going to say that, because we have it written here, I would add in writing that part that you're talking about.
My suggestion would be, since we have it written, that we would make sure that the proposal or the motion that's on the floor would include the September 2019.
The fiscal year?
Yes, please add that.
Okay, we can do that.
So my BA is like, I think he's the immediate past president of the BA's Association. I can lean on him. Would you like me to?
Sure.
I mean,
that helps.
If we need to get you in the meeting, I think we can do that.
Anything you can help us with BAs would be wonderful. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
We will keep you updated too as anything goes further with this. So if we just wanted to get this committee's take on it, then we'll have to also take it up to others in the agency before it's implemented. So, and we'll communicate that to you. Camille Sheik is our 21st Century Community Learning Center specialist. That's Title 4B. And she's going to be rolling out a new competition. As you know, for a while we weren't sure what Congress was going to do with the Title 4B after school programming, because there were proposals from the President and Secretary DeVos to eliminate that program. But it has been funded by Congress. In fact, there was actually a slight increase at the national level in that funding. And I got an email yesterday from the Department of Ed saying the House of Representatives has also included that funding and full funding for Title IIA in their budget proposal for federal fiscal year 19. Okay, that's just the House. They would have to get the Senate's proposal, and then they have to compromise, but at least it's on the table and they're thinking about it and not threatening to cut it again. So I hope we're good. But Camille?
Here, I think I'm just going to stay right here. We're a smaller group. All right, I'm Camille Sheik, so I oversee now the 21st Century Community Learning Center grant, or 21st Century. It's a competitive federal grant. Funding has been threatened for a couple years now, but we do have new funding available to grant out for the upcoming school year. So that's positive. And as Becky said, there's support. There's typically always been support from Congress for it, so we feel comfortable moving forward. I'm going to talk to you about some proposed changes to the application. They're very minor. It's just some clarification points, some updates we do need to make. We didn't have a competition last school year. We took the funding we did receive, because the funding came in last year, and we funded current programs so they could some supplemental funding. So that was made because it is a lengthy application process, and there's a lot of data gathering. There's a lot of data you have to gather and information needed. So because the funding was threatened and was so late coming down, we did a supplemental. So these are some changes we're going to discuss. So just some really brief background information. This is a federally funded competitive grant, Title 4B, and what we set our threshold as for the absolute priority to even apply is 40% free and reduced price lunch. And it's for after school or out of school time. Those are two terms we use interchangeably. So after school could mean before school, of course, after school, and then summer programming as well. So that's just some background information. And the focus is on academic enrichment as well as those opportunities. So there's of course an academic achievement gap, as well as an opportunity gap. So giving these students, like going on educational field trips, they might not have access to that. So closing that opportunity gap as well with recreation and other enrichment activities. So these are just the grant requirements that we've had for the past years. So they commit to a 5-year grant cycle. A minimum award is $100,000, and that would include, so you can apply for 1 or more sites. Typically, I don't see any applications past 6 program sites included. There is a reduction in year 4 because we push sustainability, so finding other funding to support the activities, and then a reduction in year 5, and you always must maintain the initial service level. So just some different grant types. There are the 21st Century Continuation grant types. So those are our currently funded grants, and they're in years 2 through 3. Right now, we only have grants in years 3 through 5, with many grantees in year 6 on carryover. We talked about carryover earlier because the funding was threatened and there wasn't a new grant competition. So just a breakdown of those. Always maintaining that initial service, even with the reduction. There's technical assistance and monitoring, so we contract out with the Utah After School Network to provide targeted support for improving the quality of programs. And then for our new grants, we're moving to a risk-based monitoring, so that will be for the new grantees.
Camille, are you okay with sending this PowerPoint out to everybody so they're not
Yes.
having to frantically write?
Yes, I will send it out. I will just say we don't have our final estimate yet, so that's why I didn't want to print it out for you. So no, it's an estimate right now with the funding amount that we have to grant out for this new year. We're working out percentages, so this isn't the final amount. But these are our list of our current grantees. As you can see, it's for public schools, charter schools, community-based organizations as well, who have a strong partnership with an LEA. So this is just who we currently fund. So we have a good spread funding up north. Here in Salt Lake County, down in Utah County, we fund a program in Enoch. So funding both urban and rural programs. So the upcoming grant competition. So I don't have a specific timeline right now for the release, but sometime in summer 2018, we wanted to give this committee the opportunity to review the proposed changes, provide any additional feedback as needed. So we will send additional timeline information as that becomes available. But this is the funding we have. This is the funding as estimate we have of June 6, 2018. We don't have our final award letter, but this is what the breakdown will be. So of course we'll fund our continuation grants first, those grants in years 3 through 5. And then for new grants, we will have about $3.2 million. So we have more funding than we've had in the past because we didn't have a grant competition last year. So we have no grantees who will be entering year 2. Overall, the 21st Century grant with this allocation received a boost, but Utah's amount was less than in previous years. So that's based on census data. So we have a little bit less, but we have a lot to grant out. In the last competition in the 2016-2017 school year, I think there was a little over $1 million, and that was able to fund 8 grants. So I think we can fund double that, anywhere from 16 to 20 grants, and those could include multiple program sites. So that's the estimate of funding. So I believe everyone should have received, it wasn't in your packet, but it's this sheet that has yellow highlight and some red. If you don't have one, I have one up here for you. Oh, it is in the packet. Good. So what I did is I broke down the application from the 2016-2017 school year on the left-hand side, and then the proposed application for the 2018-2019 school year on the right-hand side. And I've highlighted any changes. You can also review the other questions. I know we are getting close to running out of time, so I'll be brief and just go over the main changes. So the first main change is to the priority points. So these are additional points that programs are going above and beyond, or needs that we feel are important that will be given extra points. So we clarified with the priority points. So before there wasn't a clear distinction if all of the program sites, if you were applying for multiple program sites, if all of the program sites had to have these things. So we made some clarifications that if you're going to apply for one or more program site, so you're going to apply for 2 elementary schools, both of those elementary schools will operate 10 hours per week, 32 weeks during the school year, and then have a supervisory role for a teacher, and then offer a healthy snack. So those are for all of the sites you're applying for. And then below, at least one of the proposed program sites must be doing these things. So we made clarifications there because when it's a competitive grant, and I will say, having been part of past competitive grants, it's like 0.10 of a point that decides these. So that's why there was this need to really clarify the priority points and also include documentation. So we feel comfortable with that was the right decision to make when we're funding.
So, Camila, right?
Yes.
The IGP, I sat on the governor's subcommittee or whatever, and for schools to know their IGP was like a forbidden.
Well,
so how do you
yeah, I was going to show you. Perfect. I have it right here. So if you go to, and I can email out this website, but I did want to show you. But if you go to the Department of Workforce Services IGP Initiative webpage, they have it there. So I will show you where it is. Sure. Thank you. Okay, so if you go here, so this is the website. So jobs.utah.gov, EDO/intergenerational. And then if you go to data tools, and then you go to, we can go to county data. And so then we can go to education up at the tab up the top. And this will tell you your enrollment. So obviously Salt Lake County has many different districts in it. So you go to Granite, and it will pull up the data, the IGP enrollment rate. So the Department of Workforce Services does have it by schools now. Any questions on that? Thank you. And that link will be included when the application goes out so everyone can find it. And we will have a pre-bidders meeting to go over all of the, where can you get the data and information like that. But it is here. And if you have any questions, I can help you with that.
So they'll be getting the ranking criteria?
Yes. So we will, at the bidders, we'll include the application questions as well as the rubric. So you know what you're going to be scored on. Yes. We do not have a date yet, July or August. We are just kind of figuring some things out internally, and then we'll send out a more detailed timeline. So we talked about adding the intergenerational poverty school rate. Adding rural, I think that's really important to add an extra point for that, because as someone mentioned, rural communities, rural districts, charters might not have access to grant writers or someone at the district who has a lot of experience with that. So we want to give additional points for that. And then we're adding, we have PROS program will serve students attending a turnaround school, Title I priority or focus school, and that would be for the 2017-2018 school year, because I know there's going to be changes coming down with Title I priority and focus schools as well as school turnaround, but that will be a priority point for this upcoming application. So under the application, there were just some minor tweaks we had to make. The first one was under the program evaluation. Because we didn't have a grant competition last school year, there was a change to the federal reporting system used. It used to be, if you're familiar with the 21st Century Grant, PPICS. We now use 21 APR, so we need to update that programs will commit to providing that data and use that system. And then we also, with how we provide quality technical assistance services, we've had some changes to our assessment tool. We're moving towards a more observation-based tool, not for all of the program sites, but those program sites that might need it. So we wanted to add that in there as well. And then with the budget, so this is on page 5 of your document. With the budget, we want to add a budget narrative. I think that's very important, not only to have the question, but how did you come up to the total? So when we are reviewing invoices, when we are coming to how much carryover do you have, we can go back to the budget and we have more details about that. So adding a budget narrative form, and this will also be presented at the bidders, and it will likely just be Excel. And with private school consultation, this is something that will change with ESSA, and we will align with the ESSA language. We'll make sure this aligns how this is worded. There's alignment because it applies to all the title programs. So there will be alignment with ESSA. And then on the last page, page 6, we have a question about STEM programming and how they'll implement STEM programming into the program or program sites. And we wanted to add STEAM. So bring in that arts, just to give people more options, because it's not a one-size-fits-all with after-school programming. What are the needs of your community? What are the needs of your schools? So those are the proposed changes. I would ask that you take it back, and if you have any additional questions, or maybe, hey, do you want to think about this, please email me. And we can have that discussion, but we wanted to bring it to the committee to see what everyone thought and to let you know that there would be funding, because I've heard from different districts and community-based organizations like 21st century is over. There's no more 21st century. That's not true. We know we have it for at least another year, and it's hopeful for even the next year. So.
Will the application include ideas of how they will sustain what they're asking for? Because I know coming new into this role and having that, I'm looking at what was in the plan that we have and how it was approved to be utilized. I'm thinking, how in the world are we going to sustain that? So will that be incorporated?
So we currently have that under continuation on page 5, question 13. We have a continuation question, and that's something with once you're funded, and we do a kind of a check-in every year. That's another question we want to talk about more, because you might say something when you're writing a grant at the start of, the school year, but things change from year to year. So that's something we want to follow up and provide support around. Becky, were there any questions online? Okay. Any other questions or comments? Thank you for taking the time to review it, and please let me know any feedback or suggestions for adding priority points or maybe another programming question. Please let me know. Oh, thanks.
Yes. Thank you, Camille. Val Murdoch, we were very fortunate to get both Camille and Val that joined our team in October, and they're both very dynamic staff members. We're really grateful for their expertise. Val is our new Title I monitoring specialist. As Sandy mentioned earlier, Title I just went through kind of a regular monitoring process through the state auditor's office. And I met with the lead auditor on that yesterday, and he gave us some feedback. And one of the things that he has requested is that our monitoring process no longer be like a 5-year cycle and it's your turn because you're on the list for that year. We've really got to move into risk-based monitoring. So his suggestion was, if we have LEAs that we know are, we don't have any concerns, they would be considered low risk. Those LEAs would be on a proposed schedule of maybe 3 to 5 years. I mean, it's just a periodic check-in, but we know that they're on top of things. We really don't have concerns. But those that are at higher risk, so brand new charter schools, and as they're starting out and they're all trying to learn, and there's so much they need to learn, providing additional technical assistance and support to them, and then looking across at a variety of indicators. And we'll provide more information as this moves along, but no longer it will just be that 5-year rotation and it just happens to be your turn. Whether you need us to come out or, I mean, we're happy to come out and just say, oh, wow, you know, this looks so great and you're doing amazing things and we're so happy to visit your LEA and visit your school. We're so impressed. We want to do that, of course, to celebrate and then be able to disseminate the really great things happening, as Christelle talked about that new Promising Practices website, but moving more to risk-based overall. So I'll turn the time over to Val, and she can.
Well, I think you just did my presentation, so I can turn the time back to you. So I survived my first monitoring season, and I got to meet some of you either as peer reviewers or as the subjects of the monitoring visit. First of all, I'd like to bring your attention to this page. It's actually on our website, and it's just a year at a glance, so this will be updated each year. And it breaks down responsibilities to schools, the LEA, and the SEA. And it has the chunks of time during the year when things are due or when the school, LEA, or here at the state office should be looking at those items. If you see anything that you would like added or that you think is in the wrong spot, please let me know, maybe after this meeting, or if you think about it later, just email me, val.murdoch. Hopefully we, as Dr. Donaldson indicated, we can become more of a resource. Our webpage hopefully will expand with those evidence-based practices, with things that we get to see when we go out to Title I schools that are doing wonderful jobs. Besides monitoring for risk management, we'd also like to start monitoring for program quality and looking at student outcomes. So the monitoring process will change quite a bit over the next couple of years. Some of us here at the State Board had the privilege of participating in the design thinking workshop or training. And that growth mindset has a tool called ethnographic interviewing, or in-depth interviewing, since I'm not an anthropologist. And some of you are already highlighted on my short list of people to interview, and get an idea of the process that you go through to identify the needs that you have in your LEA or at your school or in your community, how you go about selecting the goals, who's involved with that. So just learning more about the process in a discovery mode, not in a confirmation, oh yes, you're doing it right kind of mode. And based on that data, we hope to create a virtuous cycle which is a term I learned that I love, which is the opposite of a vicious cycle. So the virtuous cycle, one thing I learned is that LEAs can cheat and they can copy and paste their needs assessment from one year to the next year in the UCA without really thinking about it much. And so this virtual cycle would give them the opportunity to really evaluate what the needs of their students are, and to what we hope to do is empower LEAs to better identify and meet their students' needs. Are there any comments or questions about the unknown? Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Just a couple of quick updates. A press release went out yesterday. I sent that out to the Title I directors, and I should have also included all of you. But the state's consolidated ESSA plan was resubmitted again yesterday morning. So our public relations director, Mark Peterson, issued a press release. Following this meeting, I will send that press release out to you in case you haven't seen it. The Department of Education has been working with the state across the past year and have asked for some, minor revisions and edits here and there just to clarify in some of the specific components of the plan. But one of the issues that in Utah has really come to light is that we have a state law which allows parents to opt their students out of the assessments. And in ESSA, the statute says that states need to have a 95% participation rate in those assessments. Our data people have run statistics on this, and currently overall in the state, we have about 94% of all students in the state participating. So we're just barely missing that, that provision in the law that states it needs to be 95%. So in the last submission, under the direction of the State Board of Education, a waiver was requested to exempt Utah from that provision. The Department of Education responded and said, this is in the statute. We really can't waive this component. It's federal law. So the agency has been working, the state board, Superintendent Dixon, members of the leadership team have been working as well with the governor's office. And so they submitted a letter yesterday, and what they are requesting is a 1-year moratorium for Utah on that provision of the 95% participation rate, so that the state has an opportunity to collaborate. The Board of Education has an opportunity to collaborate with the governor and the state legislature to see what types of solutions they can maybe come up with. Colorado and other states have similar issues in their state where they have state laws about the opt-out. Data and statistics, when they looked at all the data on schools and where there were pockets of a lot of students opting out, it was primarily occurring in high socioeconomic status communities. In charter schools, overall had a higher rate. We have some online charter schools, and so there's a very high opt-out rate there. And the issue there is those students who are, living all across the state and maybe attending one of our online schools, in order to take the test, they have to go to a location where the test can be proctored. And so in some cases, that may be really difficult for a parent or a student to get to that location. And so, they simply choose to opt out. Overall, in our Title I schools, those that are higher poverty, the opt-out rate is not very high. So we're hoping that we can come to some sort of an agreement with the Department of Education so that we can get our plan approved. So I will send you that information. You can read the letter that was sent yesterday, as well as the latest version of the plan that was submitted with revisions. Until our state plan is approved, or at least conditionally approved by the Department of Education, they don't have the mechanism to send us our funding for state fiscal year 19, which is federal fiscal year 18. So we anticipate, if that all goes well, that we will receive our grant award notification letter from the Department of Education around July 1st. Title 1A is what we call a split-funded program. So the Department of Education typically releases part of the funding on July 1st, and then the remainder of the funding is released on October 1st when the federal government changes over to another fiscal year. So that's kind of how that works. Overall, Utah's overall allocation of Title I is $6 million less than it was last year. Last year we had a little over $87 million. This year it's $81,300,000. The reason is in the federal determinations of how that money is allocated to individual states, it is based on the United States Census Bureau data of school-age children ages 5 to 17 that are living in poverty, and it's based on the federal definitions. The other part that helps determine how much a state gives is the data that the state reports of the number of children and youth that are neglected and delinquent or in foster care. So in Utah, we have a very strong economy, which is really fabulous. I mean, we've really weathered the recession better than many other states. So our economy is strong, our unemployment rate is low, and so based on those poverty estimates from the United States Census Bureau, Utah's poverty rate decreased overall by 10% or so. So it doesn't have anything to do with the percentage of students that are qualified for free and reduced lunch prices, which is typically how LEAs determine how much funding goes out to individual schools within the LEA. And they have to rank order from the highest poverty school down to their lowest, and then they determine how they're going to allocate the Title I funds that come into the LEA. But at the federal level, it's all census poverty data. It does not include free and reduced lunch data. So I just wanted to give you just a brief update on that, and I will send that press release out to you right after this meeting so that you have access to that latest information. And as additional information comes out on a regular basis, I always send the Title I directors in the state an email just to say, okay, here's where things are right now. I'll include you as well on those emails so that you will also be in that loop on the updates in case you miss the press releases or information that may come out in the local newspapers and things like that. So I just again really want to thank you. We had a lot to cover in today's meeting, and I cannot tell you how much we appreciate your willingness to serve on this committee. This is an important committee that we're required to have, and we've been so busy during the past school year with working on ESSA and gearing up for a new grants management system and working on this school improvement, systems of improvement work, that I just didn't have the time to schedule a meeting. But it really is important that we meet with you on a regular basis. So what we will do, we do need to schedule some additional meetings through the coming year. What I will try to do is identify some dates when we can have a room that has the air media available and the ability for Jerry Record, our media specialist, to record the meeting so that we can offer it online, and then the videos and these meetings are archived, so if people couldn't attend and they want to listen to what took place during the meeting, that archive will be available on our website with that YouTube link. Anybody that's online, if there are comments or questions coming, all of that information is also recorded. So if you go back and look, you'll see what people that were not able to be physically here may have commented or questions that might have been raised. So what I'll do is try to identify some dates when we have some meeting rooms available that can accommodate that kind of work. And then we'll send out a doodle poll or something to kind of capture when people are available to participate. Because your participation, your insights, and your help is just really critical to our work going forward. So again, thank you so much. I know how busy all of you are and going into the summer season, and many of you are still, knee-deep in work within your district, your schools. I mean, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here today. Our team will be here for a few minutes. If you have questions, concerns, requests, please let us know. Becky Peters has everybody's name on a roll. We have a database with everyone's email addresses in there, and so we'll keep you updated as much as we possibly can. So again, have a wonderful rest of the day. Enjoy the summer, those of you that have an opportunity that don't have to go back to the office. And We'll see you again, either online or in. Thank
Yeah, it's like 6 stories.